This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Our guest today is Sheridan Ruth. She is a trauma therapist specializing in supporting entrepreneurs to increase profit and decrease anxiety. From being stripped of every strand of hair on her body to losing her ex to suicide just 3 weeks after a breakup, she uses trauma healing to sustainably build her business. She uses body-based tools, the nervous system, and builds strategy to help business leaders succeed. She lives in Melbourne, Australia. So Sheridan, welcome to the program, and I'm glad you're on today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited because, I think that today's episode gets to be something where maybe you get to bring your perspective using body-based strategies and the nervous system. And we get to speak about this in ways that is a little bit different to some of the other episodes that you've done lately. So yeah, super excited to be able to dive into the other side of leadership and business owning.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's get right into it. So if you could just kind of start by giving us some context, where you grew up, kind of a little bit about yourself, and then how you got interested in doing this kind of business work as a coach for leaders with a different twist than what I would say would be the normal way to, or not normal, but usual way to do it.
Yeah, super different twist. And sometimes it can be almost a little bit difficult to understand or to articulate because I think I came through in a non-traditional setting. So I grew up in Canberra, Australia. It is the capital, but it's super small, very conservative. And I was always really interested. I always knew that there was like something else apart, like there was something else. So I actually went into community development work and that really grassroots area. I went and I lived in Colombia in South America for over a decade. I founded a nonprofit. It's still operational, even though I've stepped back because I'm no longer there. And I was very much in the international aid sphere, community development sphere. That was really hard, but I learned a lot about what it means to lead a small community and what it means to make a difference. Then I entered into commercial mortgage brokering, a lot of work in the Sacramento area and also in like North Carolina.
Okay.
And I did finance for a while. And then I had my own personal tragedies and just trauma and difficulty. I was struggling at that time still, but everything kind of just came to a peak, like you said, when I broke up with my ex and he committed suicide and everything was just really hard. And I'd always been very entrepreneurial. I had a plant business, a cleaning business. I had people who sold fruit for me. I was always doing these like little entrepreneurial things. And especially working in finance and seeing how do I say this? How deeply individuals can be impacted by stress and burnout and fear, and how much that can affect the people around them, and how we can enter into these unhealthy cycles of leadership in high pressure spaces. That was when I decided to pursue trauma therapy. And I was also kind of healing my own stuff. We can get into it more if we want. But I kind of found myself in this place where I had this innate capacity to understand and support people being more calm, achieve more things, be less reactive, be better people. And also a real desire to continue contributing back to systems in the community without being in the community work, because it was just not for me. It just wasn't for me, not a good use of my skills. And then I ended up building this coaching business, doing relationship coaching and anxiety coaching and OCD coaching. And people started coming and asking me like, how did you do this? like, how did you do this? You're doing all these other things. Like, how did you do this? And that was when I started coaching entrepreneurs. And it
Yeah.
kind of like I just fell into it in a way, but there was a lot of trial and error. And the body based business methodology was born from that collaboration between me and all the wonderful people that I've been able to support.
Yeah, that's amazing. And your business is called the Body Based Business, right? That's the company that you created.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So you know, helping business owners and as you're talking there, it kind of made me think about, especially in the Western world, we kind of honor or celebrate people that work extremely hard and do crazy things and give it 120% and all this and it does make you think at what cost. Because people can be. I guess the thing is, how do you define success? Is it making a lot of money? Is it running this amazing company, or is it being at peace with mental health and emotional health?
Yeah. And I guess I don't know what you would think. I would be curious your opinion because I think that we can also define success differently at different phases of our life. But I've really always struggled with this number one idea that you have that the way to more money is through push and force. I don't actually believe that that's true. The people that I've seen that have had the most successful, even just highly profitable businesses, where they're excited to go to work and their team is excited to go to work, they're not doing it out of push and force and hustle. It doesn't mean that they're not in large amounts of action, because usually when you're doing something that you love, you want to keep doing it. You're excited to do it. You might work longer hours, but it never comes at the expense, or it doesn't need to come at the expense of your heart health or your
Yeah.
relationships. And I don't know. I don't believe success is I don't believe that success means that you're sacrificing large, important parts of your life. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's a great question because I do think that we sometimes celebrate and put people on a pedestal that come at it from an unhealthy perspective. And I'll just use a few extreme examples. You take somebody like Michael Jackson, or you take, or take somebody like John Lennon, and some of these people that accomplished amazing things in music, or maybe it's actresses and actors, or maybe it's business leaders that have done thing, but you would say that they're the most kind of tortured people in
Yeah,
society,
100%.
so it's kind of like, okay, so what are we worshiping? What are we celebrating? So I do think if you find a leader who is able to accomplish what we would write, as success in business, which is, build an amazing company and make not only money for themselves but for the people they work for, and can do that and be that calm, amazing person who's at peace with themselves and their family and has time for everything. Those are the people that we probably should be looking at and trying to emulate. But quite frankly, they're probably hard to find.
They're probably hard to find. And I also think that they're just not sensational enough for us to be speaking about them. Feel like they're
Hmm.
kind of the quiet people,
Hmm.
the people that are kind of speckled out here and there. Now that we have the internet, we can find them a little bit more, but they're not so sensational. They don't provoke inside of us something big and like grand. I think you're right. I think that there's also a differentiation between achievement and success. John Lennon, Michael Jackson, um, even if you listen to some of the podcasts, well, who is the guy that does Virgin? Oh my gosh, I've just forgotten his name.
Oh yeah. Now you got me on the
Richard
spot.
Branson.
Richard Branson. There you go.
He did a podcast with CEO, Diary of a CEO, and it's very interesting. He's very open about it. He's like, yeah, my trauma with my mom is what's pushed me to succeed. And it's been very difficult on my family, and it's had a massive toll. And so at least he's kind of a little bit embodied about it and he's open about it. But
Yeah.
there's a big difference between achievement, achieving a goal, achieving a profit, and And that is important, but I struggle to say that that's success.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I remember reading in a business book too once, kind of a case study, and I don't remember exactly who the person was or what company it was, but in the business world was somewhat criticized because he built this great company, and then when he died, and someone else took over, um, it's like the business never missed him for a second. It just kept going, and he was actually criticized for that. But yet the author's point was, no, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. If you create a company where if you're not there, but it still succeeds, that's a sign of a great leader, not somebody who's created something all about themselves and then when they leave, it implodes. So I thought that was
Isn't that
interesting.
That is so interesting. And that is just such a projection of the people who are giving that judgment of their ego. Like they want to be needed. They're
Yeah.
using the business to serve their egoic desire to be needed and celebrated instead of actually creating a solution or creating a service or a legacy of some. That's so interesting.
Yeah, yeah, really interesting. So tell us what would be your ideal client? So, in the coaching world, we have clients that we really, love to work with, and we really feel like we're really making a difference in whatever. So, what is that ideal client in your world?
I love this question so much. I've never been asked this question on a podcast. It's the most obvious question, but this is such a good question, especially right now because I'm in a transition period, kind of on the end of that. But we've changed a lot who it is that I'm serving. Uh, Ideal client, the bigger picture is that we are all individuals who want the world to be a better place. But we have the intelligence to know that that's not necessarily by everybody being Mother Teresa. It's more about, am I providing a solution to something? Am I providing a smile to a client? But there's this understanding that there's something that can be done better to create more ease in small ways and in big ways. And I really, really benefit and I can uniquely support people who are really prone to burnout, who tend to be high achievers and slightly like they have like a high level of like self-critic inside.
Hmm.
um yeah, but there are people who are emotionally intelligent and usually pretty damn smart, and they need a coach who will help them almost outsmart themselves. Do you know those people who struggle to receive support because they're really smart and they will help like their therapist, they'll make their therapist kind of like run in circles, and do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think what you're saying is, a lot of people kind of have that conscious level of who they are and what they can do, but it's that, that's that inner emotional, psychological piece that, they don't understand as much as they understand the conscious outwardly.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Because I like to work with people to go in and understand that. So not understand it, but to actually change it. People who want to be more calm, people who want to be grounded, people who want to take all of their stuff. I work with a client, he works in fintech and he has a big BC that he's launching. And we addressed like his attachment to the performance of the fund. Uh, and what that actually means and where that's coming from. And it's usually really, really deep stuff. And he has the courage and the capacity to go in and address that deep stuff so that when he shows up, he can do it from a clean place where it's more concerned about what does the business need to move forward. And I've untangled all of my stuff, all of my ego, all of my stress. It doesn't mean anything. I'm really here to serve.
Yeah.
It can be somebody who's starting, somebody who's established, but those are the key parts.
And I interviewed somebody on a previous episode who was a Navy SEAL, and one of the things he said that I thought was really impactful, at least for me, was that he said, never let your identity be something that someone can take away from you. because like he said, he wanted to be a Navy SEAL and that was his only identity. And he made it. He became a Navy SEAL and then he got injured and he couldn't continue to be a Navy SEAL. So he said, I was just lost because who am I? What am I going to do? What's my purpose? He didn't know what it was. So his recommendation was, be the things that no one can take away from you. Like, be really kind, help your community, do things that someone just can't take away from you. And I thought that was profound.
Yeah. And that requires such a level of embodiment of, okay, well, what does it actually feel like in my body? How would I know that I'm being kind? Because you can't measure kind with a KPI.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great quote. Well, let's talk a little bit about the body part. Okay, so you're working with someone who is close to burnout or overwhelmed and dealing with anxiety or whatever it may be. So, if you're going to use the body systems, as we said in the intro, describe a few things that you would use to help people get to the point where they can deal with that.
Yeah. We need to look at it from three ways. So the body-based business methodology, it has the first kind of pillar is regulation. The second pillar is trauma healing. And then the third pillar is protocols. And so the first thing we need to do is we need to look at regulation. So this is where you're looking at like your breath work. How am I remaining what we would call like a regulated nervous system, which is a nervous system that's grounded, it's calm, it's able to experience stressful situations without going into a fight or a flight or a freeze response. So I can remain present with a challenge and respond with creativity, respond with thoughtfulness, respond with emotional intelligence. We have to address that regulation aspect. And you can find a lot of information on the internet about that. There's lots of practices and mindset and things. That's important. Second thing is we actually need to look at what is the drive that's pushing you to go beyond and past your embodied limits. Burnout occurs when our body has a limit that it can do every day in a specific way. And we can feel that. If we are really, really connected with our body, and we've done a lot of practices to practice being in the legs and to notice what our stomach tells us about a decision, we know exactly the amount of action to take that's going to get us to our goals. We know exactly what specific actions to take to get us to our goals, because our body wants to get us to our goals without being so exhausted at the end of the day that you get kind of that fatigue that doesn't go away. But what happens is sometimes we develop a drive to go past our capacity. And that might be, I don't know, I have a fear of failure. The whole world would fall apart. I would lose my identity if I failed at this, perhaps. And so therefore I'll push past because I think that pushing is going to avoid failure. Unfortunately, it is what creates failure. Or I don't know, maybe when I was young, I was really celebrated when I got heaps of grades and I did really well in footy and I just achieved all the things. And so now I feel like I need to achieve these things so that my spouse will love me or so that society will celebrate me. I'm afraid of what will happen if I'm not pursuing that. Or maybe just life has just been a bit more difficult than I realized. And it feels easier to just work than deal with maybe the grief of my father passing away. So I'll just keep working because then I don't have to touch on the fact that I'm sad because my dad died or something. And so we use these strategies to go in, and what we do is we just unburden the body. All of that stuff is stored in the body. You know this. And so we just release and we remove that. Then, and this is, I think, where it is a problem. It's a problem that the body-based business methodology solves, which is how do I then translate that into the actual day-to-day structure of my business? Because what most people will do is they'll do that, but they won't change anything about the operations. And so now their business is still relying on them to respond to emails at 11 p.m. at night. And everyone's freaking out because you stopped doing it, or I don't know, customer service goes wrong, or your sales process it doesn't change. And you actually start noticing that instead of having higher profit and higher ease and better margins, you actually have less. So
Hmm.
we need to translate that and say, okay, now looking at that, now with this embodiment where I'm not overworking, what needs to change in my org structure or in my sales and marketing or in the way that I pitch? What needs to change inside of the business to support me not going into burnout, not going into anxiety? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it's interesting because what you're saying, I think, is really interesting in the sense that you're going to give them some tools on how to calm the body, but you also say that something's got to change in what you're doing in the business too. It can't just be one side. So, in other words, if when we're talking here, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, oh, well, she's talking about meditation or maybe breathing techniques or whatever, which you can do. But I think what you're also saying is those are good things, and we'll get into that more as we go. But you're also saying is you need to uh, build a stronger team. You need to delegate. You need to have a different structure. You need to take the pressure all off you. Those are the kind of things that are sustainable over the long haul.
Yeah, because this is about sustainability and it is about taking the pressure off of you and learning how to do that in a way that speaks to your strengths and weaknesses. Like I have a client and they've just done through their second round of funding, and they've just hired this new wonderful sales individual. They're so excited about this, like head of sales. It's so great. But they just cannot stop micromanaging her.
Yeah.
And it's getting to a point of tension. And we've just started working with each other last week. So he came to me because he was like, it's getting to this point of tension because she's actually come to me and said, I can feel that you don't trust me. And it's making me not want to work for you. But she's the best. And he really wants to work with her. And what's happened is he had a previous company, they didn't get to profitability quick enough and it failed. Normal,
Yeah.
natural,
Yeah. Yeah.
happens.
Happens a lot.
Happens statistically, it happens a lot more often than not.
Yeah.
So but he like has taken that on himself. And so he's really struggling. Like, how do I lead her without trying to control her?
Yeah.
And that's what we're working on.
Well, and it's, I think that you have a superstar like that in your company, and I think most of them will leave if you micromanage them. You have to let them do their thing because, just like you wouldn't want to be micromanaged, neither do they. And so I think I think that's a common pitfall that some people think that they need to micromanage it, and that adds stress, not only to the person you're micromanaging, but to you too, because you're putting too much in. I mean, if you have a superstar like that and you let them do their thing and give them some autonomy and let them show you what they can do, um, in a perfect world, that should take a ton of stress off you because you've just released all that energy, right?
Well, yeah, but it means that you have to sit with uncertainty, and your nervous system response to uncertainty is red light alert, danger, 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 danger. And so, what most people will do is, even without noticing, they'll go into one of those stress response. They'll either fight and get kind of either aggressive to the person and criticize the person, or they'll criticize themselves. And they might even not realize that they've gone to this fight response and they're just like feeling tense all the time. They've just hired, they're feeling tense. Oh my God, the pressure's on. And maybe what they're actually doing is they actually start snapping at their spouse, or they start being really critical of themselves and being like, you can do this better. That was better last time. Well, it's responding to stress. That's natural. Or the flight response, trying to control everything, trying to plan and strategize. And you wasted 3 hours on a plan instead of actually sending that thing that you needed to send. Or they'll completely freeze and start just feeling exhausted and kind of just like going through the motions, but just feel so exhausted and tired, and like they can't explain how tired they are, and heavy and almost hopeless and depressed. And it's uncertainty. It's your body's response to
Yeah.
uncertainty. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the tools because there have been at least two that I can think of right off the top of my head that past guests we've had on this program that talked about the breathing, which I'm a huge believer in, and that's the idea that if you uh, when we breathe through our mouth, we stimulate that sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight response. And if we can breathe through our nose, then we can stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is more the calming, we and our systems were designed to be much more nasal breathers than mouth breathers. But over periods of time of stress and anxiety and so on, we become much more dependent on mouth breathing. So I think that's one that I understand and that some people maybe listening understand. So if you want to expand on that a little bit, fine. But what else can we do to try and get out of that overstimulated sympathetic nervous system?
Yeah, the breath is really helpful, really, really helpful, especially as a day full day-to-day practice. Just how could I breathe a little bit slower? How can I breathe? I always invite people to breathe into their belly, but actually into their legs. And it can be hard if you try to like send your breath all the way down. It's very grounding. I appreciate that, but I prefer to teach people to understand what it is that their energy in their body actually needs, because some people might approach a breath practice and they're in a functional freeze. So their nervous system has perceived that the threat, whether it's an email or a launch, is so big that they can't plan it, like they can't manage it away, they can't fight it, they can't run away from it, that they just shut down. And so when we just try to breathe to activate the parasympathetic response, it doesn't actually get us out of that freeze response, because what the body needs to do is it needs to activate energy to get us out of the freeze response first. Once it activates energy, so that means your body, if we look at it from a primal perspective, your body has said, okay, the threat is actually not that bad. I can run away. It's going to go run. Then we can come back into the rest and digest the resting, the grounded response. So it's helpful for people to understand, okay, when I'm tense and I feel like I have lots of energy, my mind is very active, I'm critical of others and myself, or I'm really like, I kind of feel fear or anxiety, like a kind of a fearful energy, then you can immediately jump to practices that are grounding and activate the parasympathetic. So you can breathe a bit slower, you can elongate your exhale, you can go for a walk, you can do some slight stretches, some movement. However, if you tend to be the person who goes through the motions, can feel a little bit like apathetic, you probably drink alcohol and like almost go into that like depressive state, the fight or flight. I don't know why alcohol is, probably because you're sitting in front of the wine, but it's like that, like it's
Yeah,
like
I'm in a wine cellar, so
you're in a wine cellar, yeah. But it's like that lethargic kind of like heaviness, like, oh, this isn't going to work. I can't do anything. I don't know enough. If you're in that space, the only breathing that's going to help you is an activating breath. So that's when I actually will encourage people like breathe through the mouth and do Wim Hof style breaths. Do go to a breathwork practice where they do mouth breathing. You can get that in different places, but you want to go do something that activates your energy. Go boxing, go for a run, just shake stuff off. Do something that is activating to your energy. And so I like to teach people to read the energy inside. And then what usually happens is, because we're smart, we know what that is. So it might just be that you go mow the lawn and then you come back and you're now regulated because you've moved energy.
yeah. And even on a day to day, you can just do things, like say you're really anxious or you're stuck in something in a meeting or something. Sometimes just getting up and moving around a little bit, just kind of gets you out of that. I've heard some funny stories where people, understand that. And so they do that. And then somebody thinks that's a power play. So then all of a sudden everybody gets up and starts moving around. But,
That's funny.
but it does work that movement, can stimulate our different nervous system functions and can help you get out of a situation where you're just frozen.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that approach as well, because when we're in meetings, especially if they're high tension or we're in some type of sales, something, what happens is our nervous system goes into a stress response and we start to perceive the other person as a threat, especially if we need to make an agreement on something. It could be with your boss, or it could be with a lead or a prospect of some sort. And when we want to do sales or any type of leadership in a way that feels really good, we actually need to be able to connect with the other person. We can't do that if our body thinks that we're in danger. So getting up and like going for a walk or doing something and just prioritizing you being regulated, the other person will join you in that regulation. And now the whole thing is just collaborative and you actually make friendships and it feels like a community. And it's like you guys are on the same page, you're doing things together. You can be creative with the solutions. You can like have productive conversations, you know?
Yeah, and another example is I don't know if this is the best example because he was pretty high wired himself, but Steve Jobs used to always say that when there was something big to decide or a big discussion to have, they'd always go out on the campus and do what he called a walk talk because he just felt
Yeah,
better that way. And so as a physical therapist and I'm I'm a physical therapist, so I know what mobility does, I know what movement does, and so in certain circles, like in a meeting with a bunch of physical therapists, they're getting up all the time and moving, and no one perceives that as a power play because they just know they're a bunch of physical therapists. But if you're sitting with a bunch of attorneys in a conference room and it's tense and somebody gets up and moves around, you can perceive that as something different.
it's
So
so
anyway,
funny.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy. So tell us a little bit about too that this tension, is it tension or is it a good, a pro and a con, or maybe you need them both between spirituality and science? Because a lot of what we're talking about right now is kind of science. So from my training background, I can say, oh, okay, I'll buy that, or that'll make sense to me because I can see the science behind it. But sometimes it's just spiritual, right?
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think everyone needs to trust that the way that they want to understand things is the best way for them. There's a place and a time for everything. Is it spiritual? Yeah. Is it scientific? Yeah. I don't like blind faith in things. I'm super skeptical. I have this embodied intuitive awareness, and I teach people to have a connection with their instinct, but I'm probably the most skeptical of the nervous system. That's why I like to understand the nervous system. And so there are some wonderful scientists doing really wonderful things. I think when we understand the science, it gives our mind a place to land that helps us actually get in touch with what our body already knows. And then we get to empower ourselves. There are some I'm writing a book at the moment, and I've been citing a lot of the different studies and reading a lot of the different studies and kind of picking and choosing which I believe is the best study. And there's a lot of studies out there that support,
Hmm.
the power of regulation in creative thinking or in decision making. Dr. Andrew Huberman has blown up. He's, for everyone who hasn't listened, neuroscientist at Stanford University who does these very in-depth podcast interviews on how our nervous system and our brain, because they are one and the same, navigate these themes of life. And he will go into the studies, and there's a reason that we're so obsessed with these studies. It's because we know this inside and we want the scientific evidence to get there. And so we have a lot of it. One of I think the pitfalls of this period in time right now is that a lot of the science is to, how do I say this? Like a lot of the science around trauma healing or around the nervous system, it's difficult to prove.
Hmm.
We're limited to, we can study our HRV. Heart Math Institute is a institute that's done amazing research on, you would know, on your heart rate variability. But there's like a really big gap. I was speaking to somebody who's doing his PhD on studying how the stress response changes how you make decisions. And so he's doing a study at the moment on like 200 individuals, and he gets them to do a really, really difficult, like it's like a decision-making thing and like analytical thinking. And then he stresses them out, and then he makes them do a breath practice with a long exhale. And he's looking at how the decisions and the way that they make decisions, and he's doing this while he's scanning their brain, changes over time. And so you've got to ground it in science, but don't let that limit like what you know to be true.
Yeah,
What
and
do
I
you think?
think that, and sometimes science is behind what we already know. Like, there's been some recent stuff come out lately where, like what'll drive an analytical person crazy is when you're in a meeting and somebody says, "Yeah, I see all the facts, I see everything, but it just doesn't feel right. I'm just going to make a gut decision." So we've said that for hundreds of years or thousands of years, maybe. But now the science is catching up to that, that there's actually a chemical response in your gut that goes up to your brain and says, wait a minute, this isn't right, or don't do this, or whatever. So I think the science sometimes catches up to things that intuitively we already know and hopefully trust. And so, now
Yeah.
what I've read recently is, the gut decision is kind of starting to be based in science where before it wasn't. So.
Yeah, the place I like to land on that, that's been really helpful for my analytical mind when I have those things, is the term neuroception. So this is by Stephen Porges, and this is about how the nervous system intakes so much information through all of the senses, so much, and it can take in things that doesn't present to us through our mind. So it kind of goes through we kind of take it in, then it goes through I would say kind of the reticular activating system, and we perceive it. The brain kind of presents to us what it thinks is important. Then we perceive that through our past experience, and then we have thoughts, emotions, feelings, and impulses. And so if your gut is telling you that there's something that hasn't been presented to you, but that your nervous system can feel, has an instinct about, just because you can't explain it with words doesn't mean that you don't follow it. You
Yeah.
can't see it all yet, but you have to listen to it because it knows more than you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you're a trauma therapist. So when you work with somebody, I've asked this to other guests too sometimes, like when you're working with people and you build that trust and they believe in you and they're looking for help and they let the guard down and do you ever worry that you take somebody in a place that maybe you don't know how to get them out of, or it's risky, like all of a sudden, what if you take somebody to a level that you don't know how to deal with? You ever worry about that?
What would the level be? Like they would become
Well,
dysregulated or
oh
something?
yeah, or just bring up stuff that was, um, decades and decades buried in their being, and they don't want to deal with it, and now all of a sudden it comes up, and now you or they are together, you have to deal with it in a sense that it doesn't wreck them, so to speak. So
Yeah.
I just worry about that sometimes, like, wow, we ask all the right questions and and all of a sudden we unlock something.
Yeah.
Can we handle it?
Honestly, I think that's a really good question to be asking. And it is a question that you need to ask yourself. I asked myself this when I found myself doing yoga therapy coaching, and we were getting deeper, and I was like, wow, I actually, this isn't responsible of me to be touching these things.
Hmm.
That was when I went and did trauma therapy training. Yes. And so I deal with it in two ways. One, regulation. The very first thing that I do with a client is teach them how to regulate themselves and identify when they're going past their limit to feel something. We do this through education and we do this through practice, and we have a very extensive yeah, we teach each other. Because ultimately you need to walk away from that session feeling better than how you went in.
Yeah, yeah,
And we do titration. And titration is this somatic therapy term of like we go into something that's a little bit uncomfortable. You probably do this in physical therapy, and then you find pleasure or neutrality. And we never,
yeah.
we never ever go past like a 6 in intensity. And I like to do that because, I am who I am. I like to make it all really lighthearted. My sessions are not like deep, like extracting. I'm really, we have a sense of humor about things and we're very light. And
Yeah.
that's just how, I don't know, it's heavy stuff and it sucks and it's hard, but there's this like obsession with making things hard when they can just be happy. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's definitely um, easier to deal with if you can make it happy and fun versus deep and dark. That's for sure. And I'm also wondering with, as we said in the intro too, you've had some personal trauma too. So do you feel like that gives you insight into helping people in a different way that someone maybe hasn't gone through that level of trauma? Or do you think everybody has had a lot of trauma and they just deal with it in different ways?
I want to say the second, but it's the first.
Okay.
I think that my experience look, teaching myself to be with, I call it like high sensation of pain, has done two things. It means that I can really understand the depth and almost the existentialness nature of the pain of other individuals without collapsing into it. I'm like, okay, yeah, like I get it. And I'm on the other side of it. So I can let you be in that and I can kind of hold and embody that. It's okay that you're in that right now. On the other side is okayness. And you're gonna get there too. So I think there's that element. And everyone also does have the capacity, but no, there are certain things that you don't get them until you get them. And you want to work with somebody who can understand it. They don't have to have been through the exact same things, but they need to understand that very specific flavor of discomfort so that your body can be like, oh, I'm not alone in this and it is okay, and have that real healing experience, you know?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's comforting in some way that when you're talking to someone who may have experienced a level of feelings that you're going through, and there's some comfort in that. I have seen sometimes people that maybe don't have experience in that level of pain and grief that are asking the kind of questions that are getting close to that. And sometimes you worry about it. It's like, oh my gosh, do you know how to deal with this if this unlocks this floodgate? But that's not to say you should shy away from it either. I mean, I would think that in the long run, unearthing that and digging that out and whatever is helpful to the process. You just have to make sure through your experience or through your training that you know where to take it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also, yeah, honestly, can I put myself on a little TED talk for a sec?
I would absolutely love you to. Go ahead, go.
It makes me angry. I get angry because I come from a coaching industry and I hate it. I'm annoyed at it because I think it's irresponsible for individuals to do that when you can tell that they don't, and they do it from a place of like an egoic nature of wanting to help somebody to alleviate themselves of the discomfort that they have around their identity or the fact that they couldn't help themselves or something. And it's irresponsible. And you're playing with the lives of another human being. It's actually not okay to do that. And because personal development has become so mainstream, and there's so many people out there who think that they're like these little gurus, and maybe like I probably was that when I began, so maybe that's why I'm so passionate about it. I don't actually, no, that's not true. I never was. I was always really like mindful, but I see so many people who are. And then what actually happens is my clients come to me having had very traumatizing experiences with therapists and with coaches where their therapist and their coach did something that was questionable. And now that person has to kind of heal and move through that. And not to say that they're a victim and not to say that it's somebody else's fault and that they're responsible. But yes, when you go into a healing profession, you have a responsibility to the psyche of another individual. And there are times where I question if the industry takes that as seriously as it should be.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for saying that. I've asked that question to many coaches, and you're the first one who actually came out and said what I think needs to be said is, you got to be yeah, you got to be mindful of what you're doing and what you're dealing with. And if you're not qualified in that or you don't have the tools to get there, don't go there because it's uh people, even business leaders that are successful can still be fragile. And so, taking them to a level that, is dangerous, I think you need to know when the signs are indicating that. And if you don't know it, you get yourself in trouble, just like what you described, the clients that come to you and say, oh my gosh, you know, look what this person did. Um, so anyway, it's been front
Can
of
I
my
add to that?
mind. Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
You said even they're successful, they're fragile. Yes, and they're also holding, like, that person is already holding the lives of other individuals. They have their family, they have their
Yeah.
team, they have their family, the families of their team. Not only is it that they are humans underneath and we're all very fragile, but when I take on, let's go back to my client. He has this new business. I think that they have maybe like, I don't know, there's probably like 11 of them in total, right? He's one of the co-founders. I'm not taking him on to work. I'm co-partnering with him as he leads these 11 people.
Mhm.
And what he experiences at the end of our session is going to impact those other people. And that matters. And you, you have to be smart.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, just thinking of things I remember hearing about is, I think it was a president of one of the Ivy League schools here in the U.S. and, just, at the height of his career and doing all these great things. And then all of a sudden he had, at the time, it was called an emotional breakdown. Now it could be anxiety attack, it could be, whatever it is, but it basically, went to overload where it tipped over. So, it's just, we are humans. We do have, unpredictable things sometimes. We have high risk things sometimes, and so it isn't just formulatic. You can't just say, "Oh, well, this is what I do with everybody," because I think a good coach will always make it 100% individualized and know how far you can push somebody and how far not to push people. And I think that's a good coach. But like anything, there's good coaches and maybe there's mediocre coaches. So,
It's true. It's true. And
yeah,
yeah, I agree.
yeah, it's just really interesting. Is there anything, in anticipation of our discussion today, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you really wanted to get into and make sure that we got on the show today?
You know what, Steve? I think that last question is the question that I wanted to be asked, but
Mhm.
and I've been wanting to be asked it for a while now, but maybe, yeah, but I just have been biting my tongue on it because, yeah. So I think that without knowing it, you kind of solved a little problem for me there, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. So without going into a therapy session of our own, how you doing? Are you doing well? You obviously in our bio we said, you went through some real trauma, and not to say that it ever ends, but you doing good?
Yeah, I am doing good. It's interesting. It's been what have been 5 or 6. It'll be it doesn't obviously can't remember, but it's been 5 years, I think, since my ex passed away, and it's been over 20 something years since I lost all my hair. And it's so I'm so lucky because I've relocated back to Australia, and the biggest challenge this year has been accepting how damn good it can get. There are times, I
That's
think,
good.
where it's like you just you don't know what's possible until you're on the other side, and it's the end of the financial year. Yes, this at the moment, so I'm doing my taxes and we're like looking at the revenue, and I didn't count the numbers numerous times. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? I
Yeah.
thought, I felt like it was much less, but excuse me.
Yeah.
um and so it's it's really cool to be on the other side, and to have so many pinch me moments and be like, okay, yeah, like this is freaking awesome. And it was pretty dark there for some times, really hard, but got through it. And now I'm writing the book, and it's like just this really cool place to be where you get to be of service more. And it just lights me up so much. Yeah.
That's
Thanks for
awesome.
asking.
That warms my heart. So
Yeah.
at this point in the interview, Sheridan, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
I'm going to say the first thing that came to my mind because I
Okay.
second guessed it. I wasn't sure if it would hit, but it's what's here. In relation to leadership, the biggest gift that you can give individuals is you being regulated and you regulating your nervous system. It means that you're able to be a safe person for them. You're able to solve the problems that need to be solved. And even though at times it might feel difficult to do the breath practice, or it might feel scary to go and do therapy, or it might feel really weird to structure your team or your day in a way that's different to your colleagues. It is the most courageous and generous thing that an individual can do is to prioritize getting themselves in that place of groundedness and ease. And ripple effect of that is you actually become successful, and or you become more successful, and you give a gift to the people around you as well every day.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. So does your book have a title yet?
Yeah, I've just picked it. You're the first person I'm going to tell. Do you want to hear?
I'd love to hear it. What is it?
Body-based business, align with your nervous system. Oh, wait for it. Prevent burnout before it starts and leave an impact.
Wow, that's great. It's when's it going to be published? Do you know yet? Are you on a timeline, or is that
I'm not
adding
on a
stress?
timeline. No, that's not stress. Gosh, let's just name it and see what happens. I would like for it to be out by the end of February.
Okay, great. Well, I wish you the best of luck with that, and I'd be anxious to see it when it comes out. So,
Mm.
Sheridan, this has been a real pleasure. It's a different twist from looking at the leadership and business and leadership coaching and so on. So I was thrilled to have you on today, and I think we learned a lot. And so thanks for being open and vulnerable and just telling us things we need to hear. So I really enjoyed the show today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, take care and have a good rest of your day. Okay, so thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.